Today we're going to be talking about stress tendencies and how knowing your stress tendencies can help you be a better significant other. And I think my advice to people is not to avoid that knowledge or avoid that almost like confrontation of self, but to face it head on.
Think about a stressful moment you had. Maybe you were running late to work. Maybe you had an assignment due and you hadn't started it yet. What were you acting like around that time? And take note of it.
So what is a stress tendency, Daniel?
I think that I think that when life is hard, when we are overwhelmed, when we're grieving, when we're frustrated with something, when there are things that are out of our control that almost like affect that overwhelm, we can feel stressed. And it's almost like our body and our minds respond to that stress in a certain way.
It's like when we're stressed, we act different.
Yeah, it's almost like the external expression to our internal stress. And these are our stress tendencies. So for some people, they bite their nails. For some people, they tap. For some people, they doodle. But for some people, it's a bit more, I guess, harmful.
Yeah.
Like some people, they fall into gambling addiction. They turn to alcoholism. They turn to drugs.
Yeah, it can also be
Abuse.
expressed, I feel like, in just like more, almost like normal ways. Like some people can be more like isolated or more internal.
Yeah.
And some people can be more external in the way they process their stress.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that sometimes there are some stress tendencies that are both unhealthy, but some are more socially acceptable than others. For example, like some people can overwork because of stress, which could be unhealthy. Whereas some people could overdrink when they're stressed, and that's a bit less socially acceptable, whereas the overwork is more socially acceptable.
Yeah.
Or even overeating. Like I feel like people pay more attention to overeating if someone has health problems. Whereas there could be someone who looks healthy, but they also have a problem with overeating. But it's like socially acceptable because there isn't like a visible manifestation of that.
Yeah.
So I think it's so important, like when thinking about our stress tendencies, to be honest with ourselves and be honest with our significant others. I think that self-honesty comes through the form of saying like, oh, when I'm stressed, I tend to do blank.
Okay.
So, yeah.
We should do that.
Yeah.
When I'm stressed, I tend to, I feel like, avoid things.
Yeah.
So if I have like a big to-do list, it's very tempting for me to just avoid it and not do it. Or a big conversation that's like maybe emotional or confrontational, then I'll try to avoid it. I feel like when I'm stressed, I tend to go like quiet kind of, or it's just hard for me to like laugh or have fun, you know?
Yeah.
Like I feel like the other night I was kind of stressed, and because our son just like didn't really sleep all day, it was like really hard for me to get things done. And I wanted to go to the gym at night, and you were coming home to like be home with him while I could go to the gym. And I felt like when you came home, like I was just very like quiet and like kind of like all business.
Yeah, I noticed that. I noticed that, and I took that
we never
to heart,
talked about it. All business.
Can we talk
and
about it now?
I was like, okay, see you. I need to go to the gym. Just kind of like wanted to get out of here so I could just go.
Yeah.
And I feel like that was like me acting in a stress tendency.
Let's remember to circle back to that, because I think that there's something in there that's worth like reflecting on.
Yeah.
My stress tendency is typically overwork or isolation, but isolation isn't like just physical isolation. So sometimes they'll go like, oh, I'm going to a coffee shop to get stuff done.
Yeah.
And I find that they actually play into each other, because like I will isolate to work.
Yeah.
And then when I'm overworking, I'm usually in isolation.
Yeah.
But I find that it's not just physical isolation, it's also emotional isolation. Like I find that
you get like distant.
like I could be in the room but feel almost like removed. And I think that it's important for us to know each other's stress tendencies, so that one, we can hold each other accountable to like pulling out of it. So like, just because my tendency is to isolate doesn't mean I get to emotionally isolate every time I'm stressed.
Yeah.
Like there's some times where you need to know where I'm at, so I need to like force myself out of that so that you're almost like getting the data and insight you need to be able to like, support me well.
Even like one day when we have more kids and they're older, it's like you can't just like isolate from them.
Oh, sorry, that's my stress tendency, so I won't see you guys for a couple days.
You're gonna need to be like present with them. Yeah.
I think we should be aware of our stress tendencies so we can communicate it to our significant other so that we can support each other in our stress. But I think it's important to know our stress tendencies so that we can police ourselves as well and ensure that the way we're handling our stress is actually healthy.
Yeah.
So for example, I could find myself in this loop of overwork and isolation. But sometimes what I wonder is if my overwork is because I wanted to feel like I'm on top of something. Like, so for example, if I'm stressed about something that is out of my control, I'll start cleaning the house because it's something I can control.
Yeah.
And then I also wonder how psychology or biology plays into that because I wonder how much my overwork or even cleaning the house or accomplishing random tasks is because of like the dopamine or like serotonin that floods into my mind. We're not psychiatrists, we're not psychologists, so we won't go in too much depth into that discussion. But I do realize that when I finish checking off a bunch of things off the to-do list, I feel better about myself. And I think that's something that's universal to the human experience.
Yeah.
What I realize is that if we don't understand our stress tendencies, there's no like proactiveness when it comes to managing it and not just accepting it. Because I think that sometimes we can go, oh, this is my stress tendency, so this is who I am, and it's always gonna be like that.
Yeah.
But I think that like there's a part of it that's like we recognize it as a stress tendency so that we can manage it.
Exactly. And I feel like recognizing stress tendencies it happens a lot in a relationship. Because outside of a relationship, I feel like for me, like with my family and stuff, I had stress tendencies, but you can kind of like hide because you can just like remove yourself from the situation. But I feel like when you're in a relationship, you're with each other all the time. There's no like hiding anymore. And so that person recognizes like, hey, why do you act like that? Why do you do that? And it becomes more obvious to you. Like even I was just thinking like that example the other night when I was going to the gym. I feel like maybe 5 years ago, I would have not just been quiet, but it would have been really snappy and really like rude and short with you, even though you did like nothing to deserve that. But now the way it expresses itself is just more like quiet because it's more like, I know if I talk too much, I'm going to come across annoyed and that's not fair to you. And maybe there's another step that 5 years from now, I'll act even more differently. And so, but I was only made aware of that because of being with you all the time, I feel like.
And I think that what you're saying is so true, that relationships bring out almost like a sort of knowledge of self that we wouldn't have in any other relationship or context. So I know parts of myself that I didn't know until we were married or until we were dating and vice versa. And I think my advice to people is not to avoid that knowledge or avoid that almost like confrontation of self, but to face it head on and be like, how can I use this or leverage this to better myself?
Yeah, totally.
So that what I'm offering to the relationship is a healthier version of myself.
Yeah.
I think that what I wanted to go back to in terms of that situation is that in that moment, I recognized that it was probably a long day for you. You were going to the gym where you'll be able to lift, get some cardio in, and then the sauna.
And come back a better person.
And I recognized in that moment that it wasn't the time to be like, hey, what's going on? Like, I'm almost like subbing you out so that you can go.
Yeah.
It wasn't the moment to confront that. I'm like, and it felt so insignificant in that moment that it wasn't worth the conversation. But I think there is points where you're dealing with your significant other who is dealing with a stressful thing, or you're seeing their stress tendency on display. And just because you're seeing it on display doesn't mean you have to confront it every time. It's like sometimes you can confront it. Sometimes you just let it go.
I don't know, maybe I'm remembering the situation wrong, but I feel like nothing really like bad or negative was happening. It was just like, you could tell like my vibe was a bit like off, where I just wanted to get out of the house. And also you can connect the dots. You're a smart person. Like, you know, I've been with our son the whole day. We know he's had a harder time sleeping lately. It's 8 p.m. when you came home. Like, there's like different factors that you can put, like, connect the dots and be like, oh, she probably should just like needs a break and wants to get out of the house, right?
Yeah, no. I think this conversation provides good grounding for further conversation in relationships.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of thought provoking, because even as we chat, I think through, okay, what are other stress tendencies I have? And what are ways I can better police them so that I can support you and be a healthier person?
Yeah.
What's like one thought you would leave someone with in terms of this whole conversation surrounding stress tendencies?
I would say really think through what yours are, especially if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, I don't know what I'm like when I'm stressed. Think about a stressful moment you had. Maybe you were running late to work. Maybe you had an assignment due and you hadn't started it yet. Maybe you had a big conversation you needed to have with a family member or a friend or your spouse. What were you acting like around that time? And take note of it. Or maybe even ask your significant other, what am I like when I'm stressed? And what? And then think, that's the first step. I feel like the second step is what needs to change. So for me, in my situation, when I was stressed, I used to have like a really snappy tone. Still, sometimes it comes out. But I feel like what I've really worked on the past few years is like, okay, when I'm stressed, you know, that whole like, if you have nothing nice to say, don't say it at all. So instead I go more, a little bit more quiet. I try to just kind of like get through the moment. And then maybe I'm taking that, what I'm like now, and working on it even more so that I can be super pleasant even when I'm stressed. One day, hopefully I'll get there. So it's like, what's your next step? Because I feel like we shouldn't just like sit in that stress tendency, but we should always be working on like, okay, how do we improve it? How do we grow it? How do we be like an easier person to live with at the end of the day?
My last thought when it comes to stress tendencies is that when it comes to an individual's stress tendencies, the individual who is experiencing or exhibiting the stress tendencies is given a key, and the person who is with them, their significant other, is also given a key. And the key that the person who is exhibiting the stress tendencies is given is to be used to figure out how to manage and make their stress tendencies more and more healthy, and almost like allow them to be exhibited in a way that isn't destroying their relationship, but is instead adding health and maturity to the relationship. But I think that the person who is with the person who's exhibiting the stress is also given a key. And so it's not just their job to say, oh, this is your stress tendency, you have to manage it. But you also have to ask yourself, as the person in relationship, being like, I have to go, Mariah is stressed, or my significant other is stressed. I'm given a key to figure out how to best support them in that. And so I have to go, not just you're stressed, go deal with that. But how can I come alongside you so that in the midst of the stress, whether it be exam season, deadlines at work, a newborn baby, I'm able to go, this isn't just your problem to deal with, but I have a role in helping mitigate some of that stress and supporting you so that the levels of stress that you're feeling are getting lesser and lesser.
Yeah, you're not adding to it.
Yeah, so to go back to that example that I mentioned before, it's like, instead of saying, why are you stressed? Or pointing out things around the house that you could have done throughout the day, or not that there was that, but like that just wouldn't have been helpful.
No.
So I'm saying, go enjoy the gym. I'm going to do things around the house. I'm going to change his diaper. I'm going to make sure things are good here, because I know that you just spent 10 hours with him where it was stressful, where there are things that you had to go through, and then doing all that, being tired is also another layer of it. So recognize that it's not just like a homework assignment for the person who's exhibiting the stress tendencies, but it's also a homework assignment for the person who is in relationship with them.
That's so good. Like, when you're in a relationship, you are a team. And when you start to forget that is when things kind of go south. You always have to remember that. Keep that top of mind. We're a team. How do we Guys, something about me, I don't know why, I hate fist bumping. I always have hated it.
It just felt like appropriate in that moment, like we're a team.
I always have hated it. It feels like maybe like sometimes it just feels like a guy thing. I rather shake someone's hand.
You know, quite truthfully, when I did that,
Yeah.
like that was the first thing that came to mind, the first gesture that came to mind when you said team.
Yeah.
And I actually forgot that you didn't like fist bumps. I guess it just goes to show you how little we fist bump.
Yeah, we never fist bump. Anyway, so if you see me in person,
I learn something new every day.
I rather shake hands or hug. Please no fist bumping. Thanks.
Anyways, that's all. If you know someone in your life that you think that this video would help, make sure to send it their way.
And if you haven't already, make sure to like and subscribe. But with that, we'll see you